So time to also turn the blockchain itself into a class, because right now it's still one file with a couple of functions and variables. So below my imports, I'll now add a class, blockchain. And in there, I'll first of all add my constructor. Init gets self. And in there, I want to set up my chain, for example. I'll name it chain so that it's easier to differentiate it from the blockchain object. Chain will be the empty list, this one here. So that is still initializing the empty blockchain here. Whoops, like that. Mining reward, that should still be some global variable outside of the class definition. So I'll move that up there. We can now remove the blockchain here. Open transactions is now part of the blockchain. So self open transactions is the attribute we're now using for all the unhandled transactions. So we can remove that now too. And the owner, well, that is something we'll also still need kind of. However, we'll pass that in from our node. The node should have some ID and we'll pass that. So I'll remove it from here. Now, load data will still be relevant, but I will indent it because it is now a method of this class. And just by indenting, we turned it into one. So now it's a class method, and therefore it should also receive self here. Now, we no longer need to refer to global blockchain or open transactions, though, because now we can instead refer to these attributes, and we have to refer to these. So let's get rid of that. And now I'm loading a file still. Nothing wrong with that. We can still do that inside of a class, of course. Blockchain is now a local variable I'm assigning this to. Then we get the updated blockchain, and then I'm saving it back into blockchain. And what I mean here is, of course, my blockchain or my chain attribute. So we should do this to self-chain, self.chain. So to this attribute we're initializing here. That is where I want to store the loaded chain in. For open transactions, it's the same. Down there, it should be self.openTransactions where I store the loaded transactions in. And if we're initializing a new blockchain down there, well, this is something I actually don't have to do anymore. We can take that entire code here and simply initialize our blockchain with that Genesis block in the constructor. Now the cool thing is, if we do load it from a file, we'll then overwrite it anyways, but otherwise we already have it initialized. So I'll load this here in the constructor, I'll create my Genesis block there, and then I'll add the Genesis block as the first element of the chain we're starting with, and again, this will be overwritten if we load data. So now we can remove our exception handler here. We can also leave it here, whatever we want. So here I'll just say print handled exception so that our program still doesn't crash if we're getting this error. We could also just add pass here to not do anything, by the way. So now we can still handle the case that the file doesn't exist and so on. Now, load data should be executed whenever the blockchain is loaded. Therefore, of course, we don't execute it here anymore. We want to execute it as part of the constructor. Here at the end, I'll execute self load data, referring to the load data method. So load data is looking good. Save data also becomes a method. So let's also indent this so that it's a method of that class now. Here, again, we need to accept self as a first argument because it's a class method, instance method now. Then we open the file. We get our savable chain. We're storing it. The problem here is we're trying to get access to the open transactions and to the blockchain. This now is self.chain for the blockchain, and for open transactions, it's self.openTransactions. And with that, the save method should also work. Proof of work needs to be indented, is now also part of our class, and when we access the blockchain, we access self.chain instead. Same for open transactions. This is now simply self.openTransactions, because again, we're accessing the attribute in our class now. For this to work, we also need to pass self as an argument, of course. Get balance, again, will be indented because it's part of that blockchain. Here we also need to get self as a first argument now, as it's an instance method. And when we access the blockchain, we want to access the chain rather. When we access open transactions, we access self-open transactions, of course. Same down there. This becomes self-chain. But with that, it's looking good. Get last blockchain value. Well, here I got my blockchain. So, of course, first of all, self is the first argument, and blockchain is replaced with self-chain in both occurrences, referring to the chain of this blockchain object. Thereafter, add transaction also has to be indented. It's now part of that blockchain object. Self is the first argument now. Sender no longer has a default of owner. We'll have to pass in a sender now all the time. We'll have to adjust the other code therefore. So now add transaction is set. In there, when we're calling getBalance is now a function, a method of this blockchain here. So what we do here when we're calling it is we're calling self getBalance. We're not calling it here, by the way, we're just passing a reference to this method. Here, when we're appending something to the open transactions, we call self.openTransactions to refer to that attribute. And saving data works with self-save data, like that. Now, down there, mine block. Let's also indent this. We, of course, also accept self, therefore. And we access self-chain. We access self-proof of work now. We access, or we got no owner here anymore. Here, we can simply pass in the sender, which we'll also get for the mining case now. Sender should be the node which mined this, of course. Therefore, in mine block, I'll accept node as a new argument. This is now actually what I want to pass here. The node could be node ID, whatever you want. Open transactions is now self.openTransactions. Blockchain is self.chain. Also down there, of course, when we append the new block. And with that, if we save this, all errors are gone in that file. It got quite a bit shorter. Now in the node.py file, we still have some work to do, and we'll do that in the next lecture.